So over the course of the last few days, a lot of you guys have been bombarding me with the question of what's the origin of Dormammu. Now, I don't know if it's because people are confusing me with Comic Historian. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I figured why not? Like, why not run over the origin story of Dormammu? Because this is like one of the best kept secrets in Marvel Comics. Like, unless you know where to look, you're never gonna find this origin story. It's actually insane. It's not like, you know, X-Men Origins, where it's literally just a series of one-shots that are origin stories. This is actually very well hidden. Now, having said that, this story is written by Roy Thomas, and it comes out of what's called the Book of Ashanti, Legends and Lore of the Dark Dimension. And it literally just runs over the legends and lore of the Dark Dimension, which is the realm where Dormammu hails from. Now, again, because of the fact that this focuses so much on the emphasis of his origin story, we're actually gonna have to add in a few tidbits of our own, because Roy Thomas really just assumes that there are certain things that we know. Of course, with Marvel Comics at the time, they didn't really publish things based on the fact that everybody was new. They would publish things with some measure of an assumption that you already knew things. But because of the fact that there were probably a lot of people who were coming to my channel based off the Doctor Strange film, I'm gonna provide you guys with the information that's not really available here in terms of background stuff. So initially we pick up with what is inherently the Dark Dimension. But at this point in time, the Dark Dimension is not ruled by Dormammu. Now, when it comes to alternate realities, and this is especially important when it comes to Doctor Strange, you have what's called the multiverse. It's literally just multiple universes, but not all universes are even. And this is the difference between a dimension and a universe. The Earth 616 continuity in Marvel Comics, the main Marvel continuity that we have right now with all new, all different Marvel, that is the Marvel Universe. Asgard is technically a universe. The Dark Dimension is technically a universe. But the reason why we call Asgard a dimension, and the reason why we call the Dark Dimension a dimension, is because they're smaller than your regular universe. That's the huge difference here. It's really just size that makes the difference between these two things. Now, admittedly, people will use them interchangeably, although I don't know anybody who refers to the realm of Dormammu as the Dark Universe. They just usually call it the Dark Dimension. And I don't know anybody that refers to Asgard as, you know, the Asgardian universe. They just call it the Asgardian dimension. But the fact remains here that when you have things where they're simply called dimensional locations, they're basically just universes, except they're smaller in size. So instead of having like countless, you know, galaxies and so on and so forth, you may have something like the Dark Dimension where there's just, I'm sorry, like Asgard, where there's just like one territory and that's it. And Asgard, that's all there is. There's just Asgard. There's nothing else there. In the Dark Dimension, you may have like one planet and that's it. Whereas in our universe and the Marvel Earth 616 universe, you have galaxies and you have planets and you have stars and you have space dust and you have all kinds of stuff out there. So anyway, because this starts off with the Dark Dimension, we initially pick up with a guy by the name of Ulnar. Now, Ulnar is currently the king of the Dark Dimension. He's literally the guy that's ruling it. The problem is that during this era of the Dark Dimension's history, concepts like war, concepts like conflict, those have basically gone away. This Dark Dimension has reached a higher level of existence whereby they now emphasize philosophy. They now emphasize science, but it's much like Asgard in the sense that magic has sort of intertwined itself with science. And so instead of having a court of scientists, you have a court of scientists slash magicians or wizards that basically take the two concepts, work them hand in hand, and then achieve different forms of technology. Now, what we also have is the realm of the Faltine. Now, those of you guys who have been around Marvel Comics for a long time and know the super obscure stuff, you probably know about Faltine, so bear with me for a second because there are a lot of people who don't. Like we said, there are all different kinds of universes out there. The Faltine dimension is quite literally a universe made of energy, or for the most part, it's made of energy. But energy can be transmuted and turned into other things. Not only that, these Faltinians, as they're referred to, are beings that are basically born by magical energies. It's literally like the energies of the universe just create life. And so somewhere along the line, these beings create life of their own. The problem here is that in this particular situation, one of the Faltinians named Sennifer had given birth, quote unquote, to offspring in the form of Dormammu and Umar. But instead of actually craving mystical energies, Dormammu and Umar craved matter. Now, Roy Thomas is being a little weird with words here. It's not as though Dormammu and Umar craved like rocks and so on and so forth, but they recognize that their ability to basically control these mystical energies allow them to control all forms of matter. And so it was really just a desire by them to explore the full capabilities of their power. The issue with this is that the Faltinians were nothing if not very dogmatic in terms of how they viewed things, which is to say they viewed things to the extreme. They said that we are mystical beings, we thrive on mystical energy, we do not delve in physical matter, which is tantamount to the equivalent of black matter, or I guess black magic, within the realm of the Faltinians. And so while Cenifer initially tried to curb this desire of Dormammu and Umar for dark matter, ultimately it didn't work. And in response, they quite literally turned Cenifer into dark matter. In response, the Faltinians banished them to the dark dimension. Now, Roy Thomas doesn't explicitly tell us in terms of, the story itself, why the dark dimension was chosen. And in truth, we don't really need to worry about that. I mean, it's not a major plot point. Well, I guess it is kind of a major plot point, but the why is not a major plot point because it's basically him just saying, this is just where they ended up. Now, it may very well have been that the Faltinians said, well, the dark dimension is a dimension where they have physical matter, but they're nowhere near on the same level as us in terms of their capabilities. So it's like sending Dormammu and Umar to a primitive universe. They basically, they'll exist there, but they won't really be able to do anything. The opposite actually happens. Because of the fact that, Dormammu and Umar crave physical matter or crave dark matter, once they end up in this universe, they realize that it's nothing like the Faltine universe. The Faltine universe is virtually energy. There's really nothing in terms of physical matter. But when they arrive in this universe, it's almost all physical matter because it's so primitive. And so the idea here is that they can basically take things over. The problem is if they were to go through and try to fight off against these various wizards, almost immediately, these wizards would probably be able to take them out. It would be a long and arduous battle, but they would probably be able to take them out. And so the best way for Dormammu and Umar to take over the dark dimension was by way of subterfuge. And so what they did is they monitored and they watched King Ulnar for a time and came to the realization that King Ulnar craved conflict. He craved the ways of old. And so they went to him and they said, hey, look, we are beings of magical energy. We can show you how to expand your universe. We can show you how to expand your dimension to consume other dimensions. Now, of course, again, Roy Thomas doesn't mean physically consuming them. He means much like the Roman Empire where they just annexed other territories. And that's what it would be. It would be, kind of creating these doorways, creating these dimensions, or I guess these, getting rid of these dimensional barriers that would allow Ulnar and his forces to go in, conquer that territory, leave a garrison behind, and allow him to be in control of it. And that's exactly what happens. While the wizards of Ulnar, while they initially protest, they say, hey, Dormammu and Umar are not what they appear to be, the desire of Ulnar to return to the ways of old overtakes his common sense. And so in response, he follows the instructions of Dormammu and Umar and begins cutting a swath through all these different dimensions that exist out there in the Marvel universe, the Marvel multiverse. But the problem here is eventually he comes upon the universe of the Mindless Ones. Now in Marvel Comics, the Mindless Ones have a very long history, and in a lot of instances, the Mindless Ones have operated as agents of Dormammu. But the Mindless Ones are basically beings that have, energy about them. They have super strength, but they usually use energy projections, things like that, but they're quite literally mindless. They just exist to do what they're told, nothing more. But because of the fact that they live in a universe where they've been virtually unchallenged, they've moved to the point where they have no direction, where they just go through and just destroy things. Roy Thomas is basically telling us the Mindless Ones are an example of the most primitive form of, multi-celled life in the sense that they just do things and they don't know why. And so because of the fact that the dimensional barriers between the dark dimension and the dimension of the Mindless Ones have been eroded, the Mindless Ones invade the dark dimension and just start killing everyone. I mean, they kill off so many people, millions in the dark dimension end up dying. And so it was more or less Dormammu and Umar engineering a war. Now, of course, a lot of the wizards of Ulnar were killed, although some did survive the experience, but in the conflict, Ulnar himself died. The problem was that Ulnar's son was not old enough to become ruler. And so because of the fact that Dormammu and Umar had basically silenced those wizards who were able to reveal the truth of the situation, banished them to the furthest reaches of the Dark Dimension, and then stood and defeated the Mindless Ones, the citizens of the Dark Dimension rallied to their cause and said, these two wizards or these two Faltinians saved our lives. They kept our dimension together. We are going to worship them as king and queen. And that's what happened. They basically elevated Dormammu and Umar to the position of rulers. Now, in truth, what Roy Thomas is telling us here is that this would have happened regardless. Dormammu and Umar would have made themselves absolute rulers of the Dark Dimension, whether or not the citizens went along with it. But the fact that the denizens of this dimension went along with it meant that it just made the transition easier. And so because of this, Dormammu officially cast off his human form that would be recognizable by Ulnar and his ilk within the Dark Dimension and took on his Faltine form, which is basically just just flames. And so during this time, which we don't really get a whole lot here in terms of what it was that he was doing, we know that Dormammu began to form allies, began to form pacts with other people in Dark Dimensions. For example, he formed pacts with Odin in Asgard. Now, we don't really see a whole lot of conflict between the two of them, and one of the biggest questions is who would win, Dormammu versus Odin? Honestly, it's a toss-up. I couldn't argue either way. But behind the scenes, the son of Ulnar was growing older, and as he was growing older, he was starting to become disillusioned with Dormammu and Umar, but he didn't really have the opportunity or didn't have the means to overtake their position. But Umar more or less granted this opportunity in providing a scenario whereby she had intercourse with the son of Ulnar, and in response, she ended up having a child. The issue with this was that as a Faltine, she wanted to see the Faltine legacy continue, but because of the fact that she gave birth to a human child, this ultimately led her to going insane. And in response, she rose up, tried to overthrow her brother, losing her mind. Dormammu banished her from the dimension, and then Dormammu himself began to look towards the idea of engaging in conquest across the entirety of the multiverse. And so this is Roy Thomas basically telling us this is the motivation of Dormammu. This is why it is that every time we've seen him in Marvel Comics emerge and become a villain, or I guess fight against Doctor Strange, his motivation has always been to overtake all things in existence, because that's just what he wants to do. He just wants to conquer all life in the Marvel multiverse. Now, in truth, the original opposition that he faced was the Ancient One, was the Ancient One going against him and basically creating mystical barriers that would keep Dormammu from being able to get out of his own dimension. Now, the reason why this matters is because within the realm of the Dark Dimension, Dormammu's at his most powerful. He literally feeds off the energies of the Dark Dimension. That's why he's so capable when he's there, and it's also why he's such a formidable threat. The issue is that much like Mephisto, beings like that, when he leaves his dimension, he becomes weaker because he doesn't have those energies to keep him charged. And so the longer he stays out, the weaker he becomes. The longer he stays out and the more energy he uses, the faster he becomes weaker. And so this is why he doesn't usually invade the Earth 616 dimension for any real measure of time. But if he were to find a way to eliminate those mystical barriers, if he were to find a way to enter the Earth 616 Marvel Universe while maintaining the energies of the Dark Dimension, then according to Doctor Strange himself, no one would be able to stand against Dormammu. Not a single being in existence. Now, we don't know if Doctor Strange means like the living tribunal and the one above all would be destroyed, or if all eternity would have to do is show up and everything's fixed. Doctor Strange doesn't really give us that indication, but the fact that this is classic Doctor Strange saying it, which is Doctor Strange when he was at his most powerful, indicates that for us as the reader, if Dormammu were to again enter the Marvel Universe at full power, being fully charged by the energies of the Dark Dimension, he would likely lay waste to all things that exist in the Marvel Universe. He would be completely unchallenged. But with that being said, that is the origin of Dormammu. That is the origin of how he came to be. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys drop a like. If you are new here to Comics Explained, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and join the Rob Corps, and leave a comment down below, because I'm kind of curious. We might explore this for next week. I mean, I've already got the idea of doing like Spawn versus Ghost Rider, but we might do this next week. If there's a character that you guys would like to see Dormammu face off against from a non-Marvel publication, so anybody not from Marvel Comics, then post that down in the description. So if you want to see Dormammu go against like someone from DC or someone from Valiant or someone from Image or something like that, Dark Horse, then leave a comment below and let me know who it is that you think that Dormammu should go against. But we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.